وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. You who believe, be mindful of God, as is His due, and make sure you devote yourselves to Him to your dying moment. And it reminds us, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ اتَّقُوا رَبَّكُمُ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَّفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا وَبَثَّ مِنْهُمَا رِجَالًا كَثِيرًا وَنِسَاءً واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. People, be mindful of your Lord, who created you from a single soul, and from it created its mate, and from the pair of them spread countless men and women far and wide. Be mindful of God, in whose name you make requests of one another. Beware of severing the ties of kinship. God is always watching over you. And He reminds us, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا يُصْلِحْ لَكُمْ أَعْمَالَكُمْ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ وَمَن يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَقَدْ فَازَ فَوْزًا عَظِيمًا. Believers, be mindful of God. Speak in a direct fashion and to good purpose. And He will put your deeds right for you and forgive you your sins. Whoever obeys God and His messenger will truly achieve a great triumph. Allah, God, is obviously above every human event or desire. He's above every human event or desire. So whether you talk about the massacres that occur in Myanmar, whether you talk about the tragedies that occur and that have occurred in Texas and Florida, these are all events that occur in our time and in our space, and God is above all of this. And He is utterly in control. And as those who follow the text of the Quran, right, as people who submit to the revelation of the text, the key idea that we have to continuously submit ourselves to is the idea that God is in charge of everything and He's always in control. That there is nothing that happens that is not in His control and that is not just and that is not equitable. Right? Because when you think without this frame of reference, then you begin to question, why does God do, or why does nature do, or why does the unknown do the things that happened in Texas or in Florida, or the things that we see unfolding in Myanmar and countless other areas and regions of the world. And the challenge for human beings is to recognize truth, the complete truth. Right? Because we are veiled from the reality that God enacts and constructs. Because He enacts and constructs beyond our full comprehension. And this becomes a challenge for us. And it is not a challenge only for us as human beings, but it's also a challenge to the prophets, peace be upon all of them, to Muhammad, to Jesus, to Abraham and Noah and Isaac and Ishmael and Jacob, and all of the plethora of prophets that we are familiar with. Right? All of them, being humans that they were not angels, they were not jinns, they were human beings, right? With exactly the same sets of limitations, but perhaps a set of additional strengths that God bestowed on them. Right? But ultimately they were human beings with similar sets of doubts and questions and similar sets of activities. Even though the Prophet ﷺ said that he was sent to perfect good character, he had to work hard to perfect good character. It didn't come easy to him. It didn't come easy to him. And it doesn't come easy to any of us. And in the struggle to perfect good character is the wisdom that Allah wants us to recognize. So, I want to share with you an instance, and this is the beauty of the perfection of good character of the Prophet ﷺ, in which Allah exercises His prerogative to teach humanity through the agency of Muhammad ﷺ, through the agency of the Prophet and his actions. And these things are documented for humanity to see in the Quran, right? You have the famous incident, and this is not what we're going to talk about today, but you have the famous incident of the Prophet turning away from the blind man because he was so engaged and engrossed in attempting to convince some of the oligarchs of Mecca about the validity and of the usefulness of his message, that a blind man who comes to him and seeks an understanding and seeks his attention, Prophet Muhammad gets annoyed with him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds him that the blind man came and you turned away. Right? So this is, what is this? Is this an admonition to the Prophet? Yes, it is. Is it a correcting of somewhere where he fell into error? Yes, it is. Is it a reminder for the rest of us to consume both the Quran and the life of the Prophet and his responses to these guidance, right? That this becomes, again, source text for us, it becomes a source of guidance and understanding. So we take a look at the incidents in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, guides the Prophet. Allah says, وكذلك أنزلناه قرآنا عربيا وصرفنا فيه من الوعيد لعلهم يتقون أو يحدث لهم ذكرا. We have sent down the Quran in the Arabic tongue and given all kinds of warnings in it so that they may be aware or take heed. Right? So this sequence of 2 verses begins with this idea that the Quran has been given in the Arabic. Why? Because Muhammad was an Arab, his community was Arab, and obviously God intends for his message to be understood. So this is the setting of this two-verse sequence. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God says, فَتَعَالَى اللَّهُ الْمَلِكُ الْحَقِّ وَلَا تَعْجَلْ بِالْقُرْآنِ مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ يُقْضَى إِلَيْكَ وَحْيُهُ وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. Right? Now this is an incredible verse because Allah is telling us, exalted be God, the one who is truly in control. Right? And it's important to recognize why Allah is saying, Al-Malik al-Haq. He's utterly in control. He can change anything he wishes. He can transform anything he wishes. And what he wishes is what happens. When we recognize this, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, Prophet, do not rush to recite before the revelation is fully complete. Why did this verse get revealed to the Prophet? Because, according to commentators and according to the Prophet's own explanation, when Jibreel would recite, then command the Prophet to recite it back. And then Jibreel will recite the next set and command the Prophet to recite it back. Okay? And in this instance, the context of revelation is that Jibreel has not finished reciting a verse, and the Prophet begins to repeat it back to him. Right? The Prophet begins to repeat back to Jibreel what Jibreel hasn't finished reciting to him. You know, maybe 2 verses, maybe 3 verses. And the Prophet is in haste to recite it back. Why might the Prophet have been in haste? Think of yourself. Right? Put yourself in the condition of the Prophet. He may have been in haste for a number of reasons. Most likely it was because he wanted to make sure that he captured it. He wanted to make sure that he got it, right? If you have ever been a teacher and you're teaching someone, and that someone starts repeating and then is making a mistake, what do teachers have the tendency to do? Interrupt and correct, right? What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is, do not be anxious in rushing. Take your time. And this is a great, great lesson, not just for the Prophet, but because the Quran is obviously addressed to the Prophet in some instances, to a woman who was questioning in some instances, to the whole community in other instances. But at all times, the text of the Quran is applicable to all of us outside the context of the original revelation. The original revelation was very specific. It's Muhammad. It's to the woman who was arguing with the Prophet. It's to the man who said something, and so on and so forth. But once the revelation is complete, now it's applicable to all of you and all of us. And so how is this verse that was originally intended for the adjustment of the Prophet's reaction to this encounter with Jibreel, how did we encounter this verse? Well, we encounter this verse and we deal with this verse by recognizing that we need to take our time when we engage with the text. And this is not just in recitation, but in considering the message of the Quran. Because in the Arabic and in the context of the revelation wasn't given to Muhammad merely to recite it. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? And it is not recited by you merely to enjoy the beautiful sound of the Quran. And the Quran, recited beautifully, is a beautiful product for your ears. But it's not its main goal. It's a product for your heart and mind and to transfer. That's the goal of the Quran. Right? That's the purpose of the words. And so the Prophet is being reminded, don't be in haste, because you need to consider the content of the Quran, the message of the Quran. So don't be in haste. And likewise, for us, it is the same thing. He would sometimes, in his eagerness, recite before Jibreel would finish. In another sequence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns and guides the Prophet again. لا تحرك به لسانك لتعجل به. Prophet, do not rush your tongue in an attempt to hasten your memorization of the revelation. Because there was part of his anxiety that if he doesn't repeat it as quickly as Jibreel is giving it to him, he will forget it. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? What does God do to calm him down? It's a very important reminder and comfort to the Prophet. إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا جَمَعَهُ وَقُرْآنَهُ. We shall make sure of its safe collection and recitation. جَمَعَهُ وَقُرْآنَهُ. That is of its jama', of its collection, and of Qur'an, of its recitation. Okay? Both will be guaranteed. God is giving a personal guarantee in this text, in this sequence of verses, that don't rush, don't be afraid, I will take care of it. Now, God doesn't act in a vacuum, right? Which is to say what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of doing things that we cannot imagine. To Him, nothing is a miracle. To us, those things that are veiled are miracles, right? But it is an amazing testimony to Allah's utter revelation that the Qur'an's safeguarding was a public event. The Qur'an's safeguarding was an event that rolled out, played out publicly from Abu Bakr, from the time of the Prophet with his two sets of scribes that wrote it down, to the time of Abu Bakr, who took all of these bits and pieces from a variety of sources and put it together, but did not have the courage, did not have the presence of mind, or did not have the adab in which he said, I need to put it all in one book form. Right? And he left that task, and it went to Umar. And Umar left that task, and finally when he came to Uthman, Uthman is the one who commissioned the first full hard copy, if you will, in written form. And by the way, this written form was without tashkil, without the marks, okay, that you are used to today. 4 copies were made, 2 copies still exist. One of them is in the mosque in Turkey, and there's another copy. But the other 2 copies have been lost. But out of those copies, and this is one way that Allah publicly demonstrated the safeguarding process of the Quran. But of course, there is the other, much more amazing way. It is through the process of recitation. You have a massively parallel way that the Quran has reached us. Right? Go anywhere in the world today, pick a reciter of the Quran. 100 reciters, 1,000 reciters, all from different parts of the Muslim world. Ask them to recite these verses in this surah. This is Surah Taha, I think. They'll recite the same thing. This is the historical evidence of God's safeguarding of the text of the Quran. There is no other text that enjoys this kind of public availability other than the Quran. There is no other text of this kind. There are millions of people who have utterly memorized it. Sadly to say today, there are millions of people who have utterly memorized it who understand not one word of it. That's a different problem. But the testimony of God's promise is alive and free to observe. Allah continues, فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ. When we have recited it, repeat the recitation. Again, a reminder to the Prophet, don't be hasty. Recite it after the Jibreel has finished reciting it, so that you first comprehend and you pay attention to the words that you're receiving. Don't be in a haste to repeat it. And it will be easy for you. ثُمَّ إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا بَيَانًا. And we shall make it clear. And this bayan, of course, is the bayan of the clarity of understanding. And what the scholars will suggest to you, and you consider it and think about whether this makes sense. فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ. When we have recited it, repeat the recitation. there is this very deliberate process by which when you hear the Quran, you hear it, then you recite it. And that pause, that deliberate separation of the hearing process and the recitation process, it is part of the next ayah. ثُمَّ إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا بَيَانًا, and we shall make it clear. This is part of the process. So when you study with a teacher, what does the teacher tell you? Listen to me first. Listen carefully. Consider what is being said. Think about it. And then proceed to the next space of asking. A teacher usually gets very annoyed if you're in the middle of explaining something and a student jumps. And a student might be very brilliant, and his or her mind might be thinking 2 steps ahead of the teacher, maybe in lock and step with the teacher, and he's anxious, she's anxious. And what Allah is sort of guiding us to think about is, look, don't do that with the text that is from me, from God. Okay? Because this is a weighty thing. The Quran is called something, it's weighty. It is deep. So don't be in a haste to understand it. And then scholars have further sort of expanded this in their own ideas of how to understand this text, and you're obviously going to do the same thing as you considered. And the important thing that they've sort of structurally developed in their own community, in their own circles of their own peers, is that they don't reach conclusions quickly. That is, the Quran was revealed over a 23-year period. And the Prophet is being commanded to take it easy to have a comprehensive understanding. And so when we, who are the recipients of a full Quran, instantly, right, you can sit there right now, and within, if you read from cover to cover, probably in 10 hours you'll finish it all. Or maybe it'll take you longer, depends on your speed of reading. But there is no way you can guarantee the first time reading, or the 20th time reading, or even the 100th time reading, that you're going to fully comprehend its message. Because the subject matters that the Quran talks about are spread all over the text. And so it takes great discipline to really thread through a subject all through the rest of the text. That's an expansive thing, 6,200 plus verses. So, while it's not an impossible task, it is an impossible task if you rush the effort. And so, this set of verses begins to sort of guide, and this is, you can challenge the ulama in their sort of hesitation, right? In scholarly circles, they're extremely careful to get to the stage of giving fatwas, right? Why? Because before you're qualified to give a fatwa on a subject matter under the rubric of the Quran's text, under the rubric of the Prophet's character and life, under the rubric of a plethora of perspective, the scholars are extremely careful in giving fatwa. You find a scholar who is a fatwa freak, that is a scholar one should be careful with. You find a scholar who is quick to give a fatwa, who is not deliberate, who doesn't take his or her time, be careful of that fatwa. Raghab al-Isfahani, who's a scholar, Persian scholar, who's an Arabist, obviously, because all Persian scholars, unlike what we think in our current minds, were Arabs. They just happen to live in what we call today normal Persian. Raghab al-Isfahani says, never trust a person's Islam, that is his understanding of Islam, until you test his capacity to reason. Until you test his capacity to reason. And this capacity to reason is not acquired by a speed read of the text of the Quran. It is acquired by a very deliberate and a very structured reading of the text of the Quran. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. لا تحرك به لسانك لتعجل به إن علينا جمعه وقرآنه فإذا قرأناه فاتبع قرآنه ثم إن علينا بيانه. Prophet, do not rush your tongue in an attempt to hasten your memorization of the revelation. the word memorization doesn't appear here. This is an extension of the understanding of the scholars. You can replace memorization with understanding. Right? لا تحرك به لسانك لتعجل به. تعجل, hastening in what? In its recitation, which was the first act of the Prophet. In its comprehension, which is the subsequent act of the Prophet. And the same thing applies to all of us. Whether we recite or we comprehend, we need to slow down. We should not hasten. إن علينا جمعه وقرآنه. We shall make sure of its safe collection and recitation. I suggested for you to consider the very public way in which the Quran was safeguarded. This is a definite marker from Allah and a blessing from God to Muhammad and the community that follows it because of the safeguarding process of the text. فإذا قرأناه فاتبع قرآنه. When we have recited it, repeat the recitation. That is, continuously consider and reconsider the text and its recitation and subsequent comprehension. Right? It's recitation and comprehension. Because recitation, as it's used in the Arabic language, is not devoid of comprehension. Some of us who are not Arabs or who don't have, more precisely, access to the Arabic language think recitation is merely that parrot recitation. That is not how recitation. قرأناه فاتبع قرآنه. قرأناه, when we have recited it, قرأناه includes formal, proper, appropriate comprehension of the text. And when you are hastening, you're not going to get that. Both in the speed of your recitation or the speed of wanting to comprehend, because the text is expansive. So one takes one's time. So very learned scholars, what do you think, how long do you think they study and consider? 15 years, 20 years? Generally a PhD in our modern context, it's a 10-year program, isn't it? 4 years of bachelor's, 2 years of master, 4 years another PhD. If you're enrolled in a seminary, traditional seminary education, you're doing 16 to 20 years of study of the text. Right? It's a bit more extensive and a bit more considered. Do not hasten and give attention to a proper, comprehensive understanding of the Quran. And so, how does that? I've mentioned that this is the purview of scholars who spend all this time. What do we do? What we do is we become more considerate of our understanding of the Quran. We become humbler of our understanding of the text. We take our time. Seek deep knowledge, deep engagement with the text, but also be humble enough so that you're comprehensive enough to seek the help of those who have actually engaged and given a long time in this process. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون واقم الصلاة